Now, this is something I do want to talk about that I don't really hear too many people talk about, right? And this is the vilification of codependency, right? The vilification of codependency. Now, a lot of this stems from having a hyper-individualistic society that hinges on the idea of independence and, to spruce it up a little bit, interdependence. But what a lot of it is about is coddling mental resistance, coddling mental reactance and emotional reactance, is coddling that, right? And it's putting people into a position where they feel as if the needs of another person are not something that are their responsibility, right? And that their needs are not someone else's responsibility. Now, this can work in different types of scenarios. Like, let's say both people are fully financially independent, right? Both people are fully sexually independent to where they're in an open marriage or open relationship. Both people have a full freedom to express whatever emotion or need or to get that elsewhere within a relationship. If that's what your relationship model is, then the idea of dependence and interdependence and avoiding codependency can be a very valid and important thing, right? But the issue is people try to bring this idea of avoiding codependency into relationships where they have specific needs that within the confines of what their relationship agreement is, they don't have the freedom to express those needs or to find those elsewhere. Now, self-soothing is definitely important. Self-soothing is definitely important. But what you have to think about when it comes to this whole topic of codependency and things like that is that oftentimes, people will deal with something called reactance. Now, what is reactance? Reactance is when you feel like something is unfair. Whether that's true or not, feeling that way makes you feel like that feeling is valid. And that feeling isn't always valid. Sometimes a person has invested in you time, energy, resources, their body, whatever it is, with an understanding that there's going to be something to come out of it. Now, I love the idea of intrinsic value, of intrinsic reward, of intrinsic motivation. But not everything in life is going to be based on that. A lot of things in life and in relationships are going to be built on making an exchange, making a transaction, making an agreement. And from that agreement, you stick to that agreement. And instead of trying to find a mindset to loophole around whatever agreement you make, you need to find a mindset that helps you take intrinsic reward in being able to follow through on whatever agreements that you have. This vilification of codependency is something that probably hurts people more than it helps people. And I believe that it plays a big part in why a lot of relationships and marriages fail today, because people take this hyper-individualistic mindset. And, these things boil down to a lot of different aspects of relationships, right? It boils down to a lot of it. And then people hyper-emotionalize and hyper-intellectualize certain things that are actually quite simple. But within the simplicity of those things, there's complexities. There's nuance. Within those nuance, people need to make themselves attractive for the outcomes that they desire. I do believe that. Work has to be done into that. So how can that look? So reactance is just basically when a person is in a position to where they feel like there are rules or boundaries or standards that feel unfair, that infringe on their autonomy or their agency. And when people are in that particular position, oftentimes the emotional reaction is to rebel against that. And that's what reactance is. Reactance is basically rebellion. But when you don't have an established hierarchy of control, or you don't have delegated tasks within a relationship or a dynamic or a partnership to where you understand what your roles are, then whatever feels like the roles you feel like taking at the moment are going to be what you feel like taking. And it's going to be very easy to find a way out if you feel like, well, I'm doing this because I want to right now, but at any point, if I don't feel like doing this anymore, I can just stop. I can just walk away and then and then just expect a person to be riled up, or expect a person to invest, and then to take that investment that they're making in you and throw it away and do whatever you want to do with it, that's unloyalty. That's disloyal. And people will do that, and then they'll feel guilty about it. And then they'll take that guilt that they feel about that investment that someone else is making in them, and then take that guilt and shame that they feel, and then project that onto the other person as if that person is trying to pressure them. You get what I'm saying? So let's say you're in a monogamous relationship. You both have a duty and a responsibility to take care of each other's sexual needs. Now, instead of just worrying about the duty and the expectation, it might start off, you're excited about it because it's new, but then after it wears off, you didn't really establish that dynamic on a level to where the sexual aspect in itself is on a pure level of desire, right? Mutually. So you do it for a little while when it's new. You're maybe making that transaction for a little while, but after a while, it's going to start to get to the point of sexual polarity erosion. Because sexual polarity plays a big part in why people are attracted to each other in the first place. But because people don't want to admit that that's a big part of what attracts them to each other, they try to make it as if it's on a level of symmetry. Not necessarily the case. So there may be a certain level of residual sexual polarity in how people encounter and deal with one another. And then after that wears off, as they get to know each other more, the man gets more emotional, the woman gets more logical. And then after that begins to happen, then the two people are in a position to where now they're starting to lose attraction. They're starting to lose respect. That dynamic is starting to get out of whack. And after the dynamic starts getting out of whack, they decide, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to try to fix this by us being on the same page. And the same page is them compromising to find a mutual page. That's further sexual polarity erosion, right? There's further erosion. And a lot of people don't understand that. That's why a lot of people will go to marriage counseling, or they'll try to quote unquote communicate and say what their needs are and not put any expectations on the individual. And if you're not together, yes, that's a better way of doing things. But if you're actually married or you're in a relationship, then sometimes what that can do is one person can be in a position to where the other person is maybe a little bit more loyal. So they're going to keep up with their agreement. They're going to keep up with the things that are expected or required of them, or they're already obligated contractually to meet up to those needs, right? So they're giving, they're getting burnt out. And then the other person is taking, but there may be the person who feels reactant about the things that they need to reciprocate, right? And if you don't have a basis, a general understanding of how to reciprocate with an individual, or how to be transactional, or how to have intrinsic reward, intrinsic motivation, and intrinsic desire to do certain things, and you don't have a dynamic to where there is, an understanding of what your dynamic is, I believe masculine, feminine dynamics, dom, sub dynamics. If you don't have that, then oftentimes it will lead to one person's needs being met and the other person's needs not being met. And if the person whose needs are not being met is unable to take a stance of dismissing the fact that their needs aren't met, right, completely, and acting as if it doesn't mean anything that their needs aren't met, then the person who's not meeting their needs, who doesn't want to do it, is going to start feeling pressure. They're going to start feeling reactant. And then they're going to want to run away from the situation. Now, that's something that happens a lot. That happens in relationships. It happens in families, right? And this is social programming that goes further than just sexual relationships. It can happen in family relationships. I know it's happened with me before. I know how it can work. So it's like, let's say, so a big part of this is, let's say you're in a scenario where you're masculine submissive, right? So masculine submissive is where a lot of this will happen. It's where you're making a logical decision about how you're going to be masculine in the situation. And someone else may be feminine dominant, right? So they may be emotional but dominant. So that means that they lack the ability to set expectations, and they didn't lead properly from the beginning. So maybe they become masculine and dominant later. Or maybe an individual is feminine and submissive, right? But then as they try to be feminine and submissive, their needs aren't being met to a certain level, and the things aren't intrinsic enough. So maybe they're masculine submissive, and then just after a while, it starts to drain their cup, to drain their social battery, to drain their emotional battery, to feel like they're being a shell of themselves, who they feel like they should be, what they feel like their life should look like. And then they're going to begin to get frustrated, and either they're going to leave, but oftentimes because of the investment they made, they are unwilling to leave because they want to see a return on that investment, and because they love or care about the person and they don't want to walk away. So when that particular type of thing happens, something that can happen and occur along those lines is that a person who's taking that stance will begin to become manipulative to get their needs met. Because oftentimes somebody who's masculine and submissive, there's a certain transaction. But once somebody experiences being feminine and submissive, or once somebody experiences being masculine and dominant, once somebody experiences polarity, and it doesn't even have to be towards the person that they're with or someone else. Sometimes it can just be feeling feminine and submissive towards whatever goal that they have, but not seeing their needs met through that goal, or through their ideology or their belief system or their mindset or social programming, and being indoctrinated into a certain mindset of how things should be. Once they get emotionally overstimulated or sexually overstimulated, it puts them into a position to where now they're unable to be feminine and dominant, because their morals, their character starting to grow. They're starting to realize, you know what, I don't have to be manipulative to get what I want. So as they start to try to be more clear in setting their expectations, right, they're noticing that when they're more clear about setting their expectations and trying to set expectations, that the fact that they aren't being manipulative about it, the fact that they aren't being overly aggressive about it, the fact that they are assertive, but they aren't trying to press the buttons of the individual to get their needs met, it puts them into a scenario to where they're going to start feeling depleted. And then that masculine dominance, that feminine dominance, it starts to regress into masculine submissive. So the dominance starts to deplete, right? And let me go ahead and explain what these different terms mean real quick. So if anybody's listening and they haven't listened to a lot of my content before, they can understand where I'm coming from. So masculine just basically means that you want things to go your way, or at least that you want what you want more than you want a specific person. So that means that you have a goal in mind. That's what typically being masculine means. You have a goal in mind, right? And often it means that you're less emotional, you're less bending, you're less yielding, you're less malleable about what you're trying to do. And it doesn't really matter, right, if it's that specific person, because there's something that you want out of it. And when you get caught between masculine and feminine, or you get caught between dominant and submissive, that's different from being a switch. It's different from being a switch. Dom-sub dynamics, they relate to more than just sex, right? And they relate to more than that. It relates to the inner workings and the outside of sexual relationships as well. So being feminine is when you're more emotional, you're more malleable, you're more bending, you're more yielding, right? But it comes from a natural place. When you're bending and yielding from a masculine place, eventually you're going to want to either become feminine and dominant, masculine submissive, or masculine and dominant, because masculine submissive is something that doesn't really float too well with the idea of society these days, right? You know, within society, for many women, their idea of what it really means to be successful is based on the standards of what is viewed as successful for a man. So for them, they want to feel masculine and dominant within their lives, but at the same time, they still want a man that they're sexually attracted to and who they can respect. But they often see things on a basis of symmetry instead of on a basis of polarity, right? And when you look at things on a basis of symmetry instead of polarity, a woman will say, well, since I'm doing this, this, and that, I want a man who can do this, this, and that as well. And oftentimes those ideas will conflict. And it's kind of like how polarity works like a magnet. You know, a positive and a positive is going to repel off of each other. So if two people are masculine, unless they want the same exact thing at that particular time, they're going to part ways, right? Unless they want the same exact thing at the same exact time, they're going to part ways. Now, if somebody's feminine, then they want that person more than they want to do things their way. So they're willing to be open and malleable to the leadership, the guidance, and the suggestions of what the masculine person is saying. That's what happens when you're feminine, right? Now, when you're dominant, that means you're the primary giver of pleasure, right? There's something that you're providing to the situation that either gives an emotional level of pleasure, a physical level of pleasure, or whatever it is that is the basis by which you're dealing with one another. So that's being dominant, right? You're the primary giver of pleasure. Now, the reason why you're the primary giver of pleasure is because when you're dominant, the pleasure that you're receiving is the pleasure of being in control. So you're the primary receiver of control, right? So when we understand this aspect of it, you're in control and you're giving pleasure. That's taking that dominant position, right? Now, when somebody is submissive, they're giving up control, right? They're giving up control, but they're receiving the pleasure. So they're giving up control, but they're receiving the pleasure. Or they're giving up control, but they're receiving something in return for that control that they're giving up. Now, that what they're receiving can be the pleasure of whatever that type of situation is. Now, when somebody's masculine and submissive, it's like a job. In this day and age, the idea of working a 9-to-5 job or working a stable job is something that doesn't give people that level of excitement, because many people are in a position in their lives to where they have to be either masculine submissive, right? Or they have to be feminine dominant. Now, what would feminine dominant be? Feminine dominant would be like being a scammer. Being feminine and dominant would be like being a con artist. Being feminine dominant would be like taking some illegal job to where you're breaking the laws and you're doing things that are exciting to you, but you're not necessarily doing it on the up and up, right? That's feminine dominant. So that would be somebody maybe trying to get rich quick scheme. That would be feminine dominant, because you're emotional, but you're unable to control your emotions and make a set plan, but you still want to be in control. So you have to take a lot of shortcuts. And a lot of the times you're in that situation because of a lack of proper planning, a lack of setting expectations for yourself or others and creating a plan, right? And then you have masculine submissive, and that's working a job. So masculine submissive is a situation to where you give up control because there's something that you want to get out of it. It's transactional, but you're not taking intrinsic reward or intrinsic motivation in the things that you do. You're not taking the reward out of intrinsically doing the things, of intrinsically of giving control as something that you enjoy. You're giving up control transactionally so that you can get resources. And how that works is once you reach a higher enough point of having resources, then you're going to realize, you know what, I want to be masculine and dominant now. Or you decide, you know what, now I want to be feminine and submissive because I have enough. So feminine and submissive, that would be like having a passion. But the thing about a passion is, unless there's something or someone who can provide for you, it's not going to work out. Because you're giving up control to whatever your emotion yields to. And when you give up control to whatever your emotion yields to, that's like a hobby, that's like a passion. Let's say you're playing video games. Let's say you're an artist. Let's say you're doing a variety of things, right? So being feminine submissive can look a variety of ways. That could mean that you take passion and enjoyment in being a stay-at-home mother. You just enjoy taking care of your kids. It's not necessarily the most logical for providing for yourself, right? Unless you're masculine submissive. But if you're feminine and submissive with a man who has the resources to provide for you, then you can put yourself into a scenario to where you can worry about the emotional aspect of it, of being submissive instead of cooperative, and then take intrinsic enjoyment. But you have to be masculine submissive in order to try to avoid being taken advantage of. But the fact that you're not walking in full power or walking in full submissiveness, the fact that you're not aligned, eventually, if you don't feel like you're being compensated enough for the work that you're putting in, then you're going to feel as if you're not being fulfilled in your life. Right? So being masculine and dominant is like having a career or being an entrepreneur, being a business owner. Now, being feminine, submissive, and being masculine and dominant are things that have a certain level of alignment, right? Because if you're masculine, all right, then you want what you want, right? More than you want a specific person, or more than you want a specific job, or more than you want a specific relationship, or more than you want that money to come from a specific place. So you're going to be masculine towards whatever your career goal focus is, right? Or you're going to be masculine and dominant saying there's a specific type of relationship dynamic that I desire to have, and it doesn't matter who it's with as long as I'm having the dynamic that I want. So you're going to say, okay, cool, well, I want what I want more than I want another person. And that gives you the ability to not be abusive. That gives you the ability to not have to be manipulative. It gives you the ability to not have to be passive aggressive because you're being assertive. And if you set expectations, then you have the logic and the practical nature of things so that you could set expectations and also mitigate your own emotional investment until you're at a place where something is going to be beneficial to you and sustainable. And when you're dominant, you're going to be in control. So that's like a business owner. That's like a boss, right? So if you're a boss, you're your own boss. That's taking a masculine dominant perspective in life. Now, when you're feminine and submissive, if you don't have anything that you could be feminine and submissive towards, except for like your goals, like let's say you're feminine and submissive towards your religious beliefs. You can be feminine and submissive towards your religious beliefs, but unless you have some type of way of providing for yourself, then you're going to have to compartmentalize that aspect of your life from a different aspect of your life, from that religious aspect of your life, so that you can walk in that path without your needs not being met, unless you just have a life where you're having a bunch of supernatural experiences, but you can't guarantee the consistency of those things. Now, being feminine and submissive is often a precursor to being truly masculine and dominant. Understand what I'm saying? So like, let's say you have a passion, right? And then there's also being integrated, right? But let's say you have a passion, you're feminine and submissive towards that passion. So you're willing to learn, you're willing to be malleable towards the instruction that you're getting or towards the knowledge that you're learning. You're willing to be give control over to your desires and your passions, and intrinsically you spend so much time working on your craft that you eventually reach a place where you can accrue resources from the passion that you have. But you have to understand is that if you're already an adult, there's going to be a certain amount of time that you're going to spend to where if you didn't establish that at a young enough age to where by the time you're responsible for taking care of yourself, that you're able to do that, then when you try to do that, or if you try to switch to doing that out of nowhere, then that means that you're going to make yourself a financial burden to someone else who may or may not have the resources to allow you to do that. So that's going to cause them to be in a situation where they may not be in alignment with what it is that you want. And then they're going to start feeling as if, right, you're going to start being masculine and submissive towards that place. And that place you're being masculine and submissive towards is going to be something that's going to be a point of contention. Right? It's going to be a point of contention. And that point of contention is going to cause the dishonesty. That point of contention is going to cause the lack of submissiveness, the lack of emotionality. And it's going to cause this point of how people treat jobs that they don't really feel like going to. So that can be just like being a college student, and then one day you realize what your goals, your passions are, your dreams are, and then now you lack the ability to feel like you're getting enough intrinsic reward out of doing your schoolwork in order to do it consistently. So it kind of just fucks up your whole, it fucks up your whole ability to follow through with certain things that are related to your passions, or certain things that are related to your job or your responsibilities. So in this day and age where a lot of things come from is this lack of alignment. There is this fear of codependency. And oftentimes it comes from people being overstimulated, whether it's sexually, whether it's emotionally, whether it's a variety of things that makes them unable to be happy in a masculine submissive position. And I believe people should be more aligned. But you have to understand is that if you're already in a relationship that isn't aligned, or you're already in a job that isn't aligned, where you don't take enough intrinsic reward out of it, right? You aren't feminine enough to be valuable to trying to actually grow, then you're going to be very stagnant in life. So let's say you're working at a job, you're masculine, submissive, you have to have a lot of discipline and willpower in order to do those things and still grow up through those ranks. Now, if you're feminine and submissive at your job, then as long as somebody is giving you the good advice, the good leadership, the good guidance, and they're, compensating you well enough, and even if they're not, you're going to be at a point where you're going to work hard because you appreciate what you have so much that you are going to climb through the ranks as long as you're giving the right guidance and instructions about how to go about it. But if you aren't given the right guidance and instruction to go about it, then you're going to be taken advantage of. And that's a big part of this capitalistic society, where the goal is to take advantage of people instead of to put them in a position to where they can grow. So you may be feminine and submissive, and then eventually your cup gets drained, you get worn out. There's too much work going on. You have to work too many hours, or you're not being compensated adequately for your hours. And then when you leave that job, you go home, you don't have enough money to take care of your responsibilities. You don't have enough free time to do things that you enjoy. So then it puts you into a position to where either your life becomes all about work and you don't have time for anything else, and then your social life dies, your romantic life dies, or you put yourself into a position to where you're going to have to realize, okay, let me tone down my emotionality about this job. They don't care about me as much as I think they do. So let me care less, do the bare minimum when I go in. And then after I do the bare minimum when I go in, I get my check, I go home, and I do other things that I enjoy. So what masculine and submissive often tends to leading to is people having to live a lifestyle of, what do you call that thing? Extracurricular activities. This is something that often leads to vices like drugs, sex addictions, porn addictions. What else does it lead to? Video game addictions. Now, what is video games, right? That's something that you could be feminine and submissive towards, something that you enjoy enough to do it because you enjoy it. Now, you can be feminine and submissive with the games if you're getting the right guidance to get to the point where you can make money playing video games, right? You can get the right guidance with your drugs. Let's say you smoking weed, right? Or something like that. You can get to the point where you enjoy doing it so much, right? That you say, you know what? You get some guidance. Somebody gives you some advice. You say, you know what? I'm going to move out to Colorado. I'm going to move out to California. And then you start becoming a connoisseur of those different things that you study to the point where you can become masculine and dominant in that field. You can become, let's say if you have a sex addiction, right? Well, you can overcome the addictive aspect of it and make sure that it is something that leads to a good place in your life. So then you can take that enjoyment that you have in it, then you can study, learn what you're doing in that time, and then you can learn to make money with that in some way. Maybe giving sex advice, maybe making an OnlyFans if that's something you want to do. Hey, I'm not judging. Or maybe it's a variety of things. Maybe you can make and sell sex toys that help enrich people's lives and their love lives and their marriages, right? There's different things that you can do. Let's say that you're addicted to social media. So you say, you know what? I'm enjoying this for the sake of enjoying it, but I'm not really seeing the return on investment with my time. So I'm going to learn the algorithms. I'm going to learn the posts that really get the validation. I'm going to learn how to get the clout in a way that doesn't go against my morals and my standards and my values. And then you learn how to get enough, of that so that you could be in a dominant masculine position with that. And then now you're in alignment to where you can make money doing that. So you can make money as a social media influencer. But oftentimes, before somebody gets to that place, they may have to be feminine and dominant, right? And that's the thing about it. Like with all these things, you may have to go to a feminine dominant place before you get there. So you might have to fake it till you make it in some capacities, right? You might have to do that. But all of this goes along with the idea of codependency. Right now, there's a hyper-individualistic mindset within society that's very pervasive. And people go along because they get emotionalized by it, because a lot of people have a victim mentality in scenarios where they are not the victim. Sometimes people feel like they're a victim when they're dealing with somebody in a way to where they're not meeting the needs of the individual based off of what they agreed to or based off of the standards that were met, or they're purposefully dealing with somebody who uses manipulation and plausible deniability about their intentions. And then when they're dealing with people in that way, then they find themselves in a scenario where they feel taken advantage of when they didn't properly vet to make sure that they were in a situation that was good for them. So when people go through those steps, they go through that process, then they start feeling taken advantage of. When they don't realize that the part of the reason they feel taken advantage of is because a person was investing in them. And when they didn't see a return on investment, they started to feel taken advantage of themselves. And then they started to become either more manipulative, or they became abusive, or they felt frustrated because they were investing. And through all that investment, it made them unwilling to walk away themselves. So they became emotional over their investment. And when they become emotional over their investment, and maybe they communicated their needs, maybe they said what they wants were, and then somebody agreed to meet those needs, to meet those wants. And then that puts them into a scenario to where they're too tied in. So they take the word for it instead of looking at the actions. And then after a while, they just start feeling taken advantage of. And hurt people. This codependency, this myth of codependency, there are situations where that can be bad. There are situations where people don't have enough security to be dependent on another individual in that way. But another thing to understand is that life often works better where people delegate tasks. When tasks are delegated, there are different positions that people run. There are different positions and hierarchies to where people understand what their role is, and their position is only up until the extent of the role that they can handle. And that's understood, then things tend to run smoother. When you're looking at a boat or a plane or a ship, what do you notice? There's a captain or there's a pilot. There's not two pilots. There's not two captains. There's going to be a captain and a co-captain, right? There might be a captain and a co-pilot, but there's not a matter of there being two captains, because that's the masculine role. That's the person who is, the masculine dominant position is going to be the person who is in that lead role. And that lead role has to be somebody who's qualified as far as their mindset, their experience, right? They qualify for that position and they have a plan. They have the understanding of what to do in those scenarios. And when they have that, if the person up under them is not feminine and submissive to what their goal is, then there's going to be conflict within whatever relationship or ship or whatever partnership or relational aspect of life or interpersonal dynamic that they're in. There's going to be conflict, right? Now, sometimes that conflict is necessary, but at the same time, there should be enough trust there, enough respect there, enough reverence there so that things can move smoother, because there's still a chain of command. And if there is no chain of command, then it leads to people often taking a masculine submissive role. And based off of that masculine submissive role, they're going to judge the masculine dominant role based off of their own idea of what they feel like they should be compensated for. Right. And that often leads to issues within relationships. That often leads to issues within businesses, within companies, within corporations. People have to be vetted, and people have to be in a position to where they have the ability to maintain and sustain the things that need to be done. So when people have a mindset of everybody needs to be their own leader and everybody's a leader of this and everybody's a leader of that, but nobody's taking that role to where they say, you know what, I'm going to listen, I'm going to understand, they know more than I know, I'm going to learn from them. When nobody ever takes that position, then everybody's going to feel like they know every fucking thing. Everybody's going to feel that way. Every man has to have areas in his life where he's feminine and submissive to something or somebody. Every woman needs to have some scenarios and some situations in her life where she's feminine and submissive towards somebody. And if that somebody is somebody who's not going to be there for you, right? If things go bad, then how invested you are over time is going to be something that's difficult. But at the same time, somebody who's masculine and dominant, unless they're your father or unless they're your parent or they're invested in you on a certain level, and they know that you're vetted for the position that you need to embark on, for the journey that you need to embark on, you're prepared for it, then oftentimes they're not going to want to take that role in obligating themselves to provide for you. So I think about it kind of like Mr. Miyagi, right? What is reactance? When we think about reactance, think about Daniel-san, right? Daniel-san was invited by Mr. Miyagi, or he went to him because he wanted to learn how to be a martial artist. He wanted to learn how to defend himself. In his mind, he thought he needed to start with punch kicks and all this other shit, right? But for Mr. Miyagi, he needed to build up his smaller muscle groups first, right? That's the small skills. Those small skills are going to be what makes or breaks the hard skills. So he needed to take him through that process first. And while he was taking him through that process, Daniel-san started to get frustrated because it's like, what the fuck are we doing? This looks like bullshit. This doesn't look like something that's actually beneficial, right? So Mr. Miyagi, when he finally got frustrated enough to take a step forward, that's when he realized, okay, cool. Wax on, wax off. And then from that position of wax on, wax off, when he saw that what he was learning was something that was actually beneficial and he was actually learning something, those small skills were helping him develop the hard skills on a more natural and a more organic level, then that's where he got to the place where he was able to be feminine and submissive towards the tutelage and the knowledge of Mr. Miyagi. And when he was able to be feminine and submissive towards the tutelage of Mr. Miyagi, that's when he really began to excel. But sometimes you may feel like you're not getting everything out of it when truly the different tasks and the different positions and the different minor small skills, people are emotionally overstimulated to where they feel like they need everything to be microwave. And sometimes those smaller skills that we need to learn in life are the smaller skills that are going to make and break the hard skills. And sometimes we're going to naturally learn the hard skills through taking the time to be feminine and submissive, not have to know everything, not feel like we know exactly what we need to do before we do it, and then submit ourselves to somebody who knows more about whatever that is so that we could be in a position to where we will get the proper preparation for the places that we need to go to. And if relationships are pushed in this idea of pushing interdependence, of pushing two people know exactly what they want, and as long as they want the same thing, they're good. As long as they want the same thing, on the same page. But the moment they hit the fork in the road, that's where it creates issues. See, the thing to understand about it is this. When I talk about the parable of the fork in the road, it works in this particular way. You know, the parable of the fork in the road, and I'm going to talk about the parable of the fork in the road, and then I'm going to close out, right? So the parable of the fork in the road works like this. Two people in life, they're relating to each other. So it's relational, right? Especially in relationships. So we have to be honest about the nature of relationships between men and women, and how women and men are naturally set up. Especially how women tend to be naturally set up. And men as well. Men as well. Because there's social pressures, and not only social pressures, but there's just the hormones in our bodies. There's our makeups. There's things that we're going to be more suited for than others. That's just the truth. That's just the nature of reality. So what we have to understand in these scenarios is the fork in the road works like this. Two people can want the same exact thing and move forward on that basis. But when they reach a fork in the road, they either have to part ways, stay stagnant, or go in one of the two directions. Right? So when you're going in one of the two directions, it's typically going to work like this. If you stay stagnant, the feminine nature of a woman is going to work like this. If it's stagnant for too long, she's going to lose respect and she's going to go on her own path. Right? If it's stagnant for too long, she's going to lose interest. She's going to lose respect for a man not going in his direction, regardless of what direction she wants to go in. And then she's going to lose respect for him, even if she appreciates it. Right? So if he goes in her path, then once she gets to a place of feeling more secure, she's going to desire to be more feminine and more emotional, because that's her nature. Oftentimes, masculinity is a defense mechanism for a woman so that she can protect herself in times and situations where she doesn't feel safe. So when a woman goes in her own way, oftentimes that is a way of saying that she doesn't feel that there is a man in her vicinity that she trusts and respects enough to lead her. So when she's going in that direction, if a man follows behind her, she's not going to respect that man. She's not. But respect is more vital to the desire of a woman than it is to the desire of a man. Because a man can just respect the nature of a woman, that's a woman. And he can respect that and still desire her, still value her, still care for her. So if he goes in her direction and follows behind her, then it's going to be a scenario to where she's going to lose respect for him. She's going to lose desire for him. And then she is probably going to find something else or someone else that she can begin to follow, whether that's one of her beliefs. Maybe that's social programming. Maybe that's another man. Maybe it's another woman. You never know these days, right? But if a man goes in the direction that he's going in, if the woman decides to be feminine and submissive enough, then she'll follow him. If she follows him, then she can see him moving in whatever direction he's going in, and then she can respect him, she can desire him, and then things can move forward. And that's just something to understand about the parable of the fork in the road. So this is Brody. I'm out.